politics in England on the day of her death than when she ascended the throne. Charles V and Philip II grasped at universal dominion, but their strength became weakness, their achievements failures. On the other hand, see what has come from disaster. How bitter to John Robinson, William Brewster, and the poor people of Scrooby and Austerfield to be driven from home, to be exiles. But out of that bitterness has come the Republic of the Western world. Who won, King James or John Robinson and William Brewster? There is still one other point. You will notice that while the oppressors have carried out their plans and had things their own way, there were other forces silently at work, which in time undermined their plans, as if a divine hand were directing the counterplan. Whoever peruses the story of liberty without recognizing this feature will fail of fully comprehending the meaning of history. There must be a meaning to history, or else existence is an incomprehensible enigma. Some men assert that the marvelous events of history are only a series of coincidences. But was it by chance that the great uprising in Germany once lay unfolded, as it were, in the beckoning hand of Ursula Cotta? How happened it that behind the passion of Henry VIII for Anne Boleyn should be the separation of England from the Church of Rome, and all the mighty results to civilization and Christianity that came from that event? How came it to pass that when the world was ready for it, and not before, George Buchanan should teach the doctrine that the people were the only legitimate source of power? Men act freely in laying and executing their plans, but behind the turmoil and conflict of human wills, there is an unseen power that shapes destiny. Nations rise and fall, generations come and go. Yet through the ages there has been an advancement of justice, truth, right, and liberty. To what end? Is it not the march of the human race toward an Eden of rest and peace? If while reading this story you are roused to indignation, or pained at the recital of wrong and outrage, remember that out of endurance and sacrifice has come all that you hold most dear. So will you comprehend what liberty has cost, and what it is worth. The Story of Liberty. Chapter 1. John Lackland and the Barons. At the time when this story begins, there is very little liberty in the world. It is the 15th of June, and the grass is fresh and green in the Runnymede meadow, where the army of God has set up its encampment. No other army like it was ever seen. All the great men of England are in its ranks, the barons and lords, the owners of castles who ride on noble horses, wear coats of mail, and are armed with swords and lances. Pavilions and tents dot the meadow. Flags and banners wave in the summer air. General Fitzwalter is commander. There is no hostile army near at hand, nor will there be any clashing of arms on this 15th of June. And yet before the sun goes down, the army of God will win a great victory over the King of England, John Lackland, who is in Windsor Castle, which overlooks the meadow from the south side of the River Thames, which comes down from the northwest and sweeps on to London. The king is called John Lackland because his father did not deed him any land. His brother was Richard Coeur de Lion, the Lion-Hearted, who was brave, but also wicked and cruel. He commanded the Crusaders, and fought the Saracens under Saladin in Palestine. One day he told his cook to have some fresh pork for dinner, but the cook had no pork, nor did he know where to find a pig. He was in trouble, for if there was no pork on the table, he would stand a chance of having his head chopped off. He had heard it said, however, that human flesh tasted like pork. Knowing that no pork was to be had, he killed a Saracen prisoner and cooked some of the flesh and placed it on the table. The king praised the dinner. Perhaps, however, he mistrusted that it was not pork, for, said Richard, "Bring in the head of the pig, that I may see it." The poor cook knew not what to do. Now he certainly would have his head cut off. With much trembling he brought in the head of the Saracen. The king laughed when he saw it. "We shall not want for pork as long as we have 60,000 prisoners," he said, not in the least disturbed to know that he had been eating human flesh. The Saracen general, Saladin, sent 30 ambassadors to Richard, beseeching him not to put the prisoners to death. Richard gave them an entertainment, and instead of ornamenting the banquet with flowers, he had 30 Saracens killed and their heads placed on the table. Instead of acceding to the request of Saladin, he had the 60,000 men, women, and children slaughtered out on the plain east of the city of Acre. "Tell your master that after such a fashion the Christians wage war against infidels," said Richard to the ambassadors. Kings did as they pleased, but for everybody else there was no liberty. When Richard died, John seized all his money, jewels, and the throne, pretending that Richard had made a will in his favor. John's older brother, Geoffrey, who was heir to the throne, was dead. But Geoffrey had a son, Arthur, whose right to the throne was as good as John's. Arthur was a boy, while John was 32 years old. The uncle seized Arthur and put him into a dungeon in the Tower of London, and ordered the keeper, Hubert de Burgh, to put Arthur's eyes out with a red-hot iron. Shakespeare has pictured the scene when Hubert entered one morning and showed Arthur his uncle's order. Arthur: "Must you with hot irons burn out both mine eyes?" Hubert: "Young boy, I must." Arthur: "And will you?" Hubert: "And I will." Arthur: "Have you the heart? When your head did but ache, I knit my handkerchief about your brows, the best I had, a princess wrought it me, and I did never ask it you again, and with my hand at midnight held your head, and like the watchful minutes to the hour, still and anon cheered up the heavy time, saying, What lack you, and where lies your grief? Or what good love may I perform for you? Many a poor man's son would have lain still, and ne'er have spoke a loving word to you. But you at your sick service had a prince. Nay, you may think my love was crafty love, and call it cunning. Do, and if you will. If heaven be pleased that you must use me ill, why then you must. Will you put out mine eyes? These eyes that never did, nor never shall, so much as frown on you? Hubert: "I have sworn to do it, and with hot irons must I burn them out." But he did not. Arthur was so affectionate and kind that Hubert had not the heart to do it. It is not certainly known what became of Arthur, but that John had him murdered is most probable. Before John seized the throne, he married a girl named Avisa, daughter of the Duke of Gloucester. But afterward he saw Isabella, wife of Count Lamarche in Normandy, and deserting Avisa, persuaded the foolish woman to leave her husband and marry him. When the Count and his friends flew to arms, he seized them, took them over to England, thrust them into loathsome dungeons, and starved them to death, while he lived in affluence in the castle at Windsor. There were rich Jews in London and Bristol, and John coveted their money. He seized them. "Give up your money, or I will have your teeth pulled, every one of them," said he. Most of them gave up their money, but one man resisted. "Pull a tooth," said the king. The tooth was pulled. "Will you give up your money?" "No." "Pull another." Out came another tooth. "Will you comply with the king's demands?" "No." "Pull 'em all out." Out they came. "Will you hand over your money?" "No." "Then seize it, take all." So the poor man lost his teeth and his money also. John commanded the country people to drive their cattle into camp, and supply his soldiers with food. The people in Wales, however, would not obey, whereupon he seized 28 sons of the chief families and shut them up in prison. That stirred the Welshmen's blood, and they flew to arms. But John, instead of giving up the young men, put them to death. He is a tyrant. The barons and lords have resolved that they will no longer submit to his tyranny. They have organized themselves into an army, calling themselves the Army of God. A few months ago they sent a deputation to the king, stating their demands. "I will not grant them liberties which will make me a slave," he said, swearing terrible oaths. There is no liberty for anybody except for this wicked and cruel tyrant. But his answer only makes the barons more determined. They resolve that if the king will not grant what they ask, they will secure it by the sword. John can swear terrible oaths and make a great bluster, but he is a coward, as all blusterers are, and turns pale when he finds that the army of God is marching to seize him. He sends word to the barons that he will meet them at Runnymede on the 15th of June, and grant what they desire. The barons have written out their demands on parchment. They will have them in writing, and the agreement shall be the law of the land. John rides down from the castle, accompanied by a cavalcade, through Windsor Forest, where the deer are feeding, and where pheasants are building their nests, and meets the barons on an island in the river.